Viktor stands in the room where the heart pounds like a small animal. Viktor remembers the meeting, the laugh that sounded like judgment, the throat gone dry. Viktor remembers thinking, if they see the tremor, they will see the weakness. Viktor learned to hide. Viktor learned to freeze. Viktor learned the quiet math of shrinking so others wouldn't look too long. When Nietzsche talks about self-overcoming, he is not asking you to be a superhero. Nietzsche is asking you to become the person who writes his own rules. Viktor translates that into plain speech. Pick your values and practice them. When Jung says the shadow waits in the wings, he means the parts you hide are often the parts that give you power once you meet them. Viktor will show you how to meet them without being swallowed. Here's the truth that shocks people. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what happens after fear is seen and named. Viktor sees fear. Viktor names fear. Viktor breathes. Viktor acts. You will copy Viktor's cadence until it becomes your own rhythm. First, the foundation. Viktor explains the alarm. The brain treats social threat like physical threat. Your chest tightens. Your mouth goes dry. You imagine a judgment, and the body prepares. That preparation is not a moral failure. It is survival. Viktor does not moralize the tremor. Viktor teaches a practical move. Viktor teaches the 90-second anchor. Viktor breathes in for 4. Viktor holds a count of 2. Viktor breathes out for 6. Viktor says the word steady on the out-breath. Viktor repeats this for 90 seconds. The chest loosens. The mind loosens. Viktor asks you to try it now, wherever you are. Viktor waits with you in the silence. Viktor does not rush. Why 90 seconds? Because the body needs time to notice a different rhythm. The brain does not switch like a light. It learns like a muscle. Viktor repeats, 90 seconds. Viktor repeats, steady. This simple move is the first proof. You can change the chemistry of fear. You do not need to be perfect. You need to be present. Now Viktor asks the larger question. Whose values are you living? Viktor points to the small story you tell yourself. I must be liked. I must be right. I must never appear foolish. These are borrowed rules. Nietzsche called this herd morality. Viktor calls it the mirror of other people. When you live by other people's mirror, your life depends on their approval. That creates anxiety. Viktor invites a different project. Choose 3 values that feel like you, not ones you inherited. Viktor writes his 3 in a coffee shop. Viktor chooses honesty, curiosity, consistency. Viktor tests them. Viktor says no when a request would break consistency. Viktor flinches. The room shifts. Viktor feels fear. Viktor breathes the 90-second anchor. Viktor writes this down. Values are small, repeatable actions. Values are practice, not slogans. Here is a micro-challenge you can do in public. Viktor calls it the one-sentence boundary. Viktor speaks. I can't help with that right now. Viktor says it plainly. Viktor keeps his shoulders relaxed. Viktor notices a spike of heat and a mental story they will dislike me. Viktor breathes 90 seconds. Viktor repeats the sentence one more time if needed. Viktor watches the world not implode. Viktor writes down what actually happened. Most often, nothing catastrophic. Viktor smiles. You will smile too. That small no is one clean brick toward a different self. Viktor now opens the door to the shadow. Viktor warns, this is not dramatic psychobabble. The shadow is the parts you shove in the basement. The parts that show up as sudden anger, envy, or a secret longing to be bold. These parts make social anxiety worse because you pretend they don't exist. Pretending is exhausting. Viktor's tool is a short naming ritual. Viktor's naming ritual works like this. Viktor sits for 3 minutes. Viktor asks, what do I hide when I'm afraid? Viktor writes the first 5 words that come. Viktor does not judge them. Viktor reads them aloud to himself in the mirror. Viktor says, hello. Viktor does not apologize. Viktor gives a small piece of attention to the shadow. The shadow stops screaming from the dark. It calms. Viktor says the quiet truth. Attention tames what you hide. This is not therapy in a single step. It is a habit that chips away at secrecy. Each small meeting with your shadow reduces the energy it has to hijack your social life. Viktor repeats. Name, own, integrate. Viktor shows a live example. Viktor admits, once, Viktor found a small shame he wanted applause more than he wanted truth. Viktor said it out loud. Viktor felt relief. The applause lost its absolute power. Viktor felt freer. Viktor now folds Nietzsche with Jung. Nietzsche tells you to create values. Jung tells you to own parts of yourself. Viktor puts them together like this. Choose values that include the shadow. If curiosity is a value, allow your curiosity to include your angry, messy edges. If honesty is a value, practice telling a small, true thing that makes you feel vulnerable. That combination makes social action sustainable. It is not courage for spectacle, it is courage with roots. Viktor injects a forward reference. Here's why this matters for what comes next. Learning to steady the body and name the shadow prepares you to act. Action rewires fear. Viktor will give you steps to act without collapsing. But you cannot act from a hollow place. You need a foundation. That is the work here. Viktor knows resistance. Viktor sees the patterns. Intellectualization. Avoidance. Self-sabotage. Viktor speaks plainly to the intellectualizer. Viktor says, thinking about fear is not the same as moving through it. Viktor offers a small check. Once a day, do 1 minute of awkwardness practice. Viktor gives examples. Ask a stranger their opinion on a book. Tell a colleague a tiny truth. Stand in a small group and keep your voice steady for 10 seconds. The goal is not mastery. The goal is practice. Viktor asks you to measure the mild discomfort. Viktor wants numbers. Not because Viktor is cold, because small wins compound. Viktor asks, how many awkward moments did you endure this week? Viktor counts 3. Viktor smiles. 3 is better than 0. Viktor celebrates. Viktor now gives the philosophical reframe that will hold the work together. Nietzsche's big line, become who you are. Viktor translates, stop acting like a copy of what other people want. Jung's injunction, make the unconscious conscious. Viktor translates, notice what you hide and give it room. The daily life version is this: steady the body, name the fear, practice honest action, choose values that stick. Viktor offers a practical ritual to end the day. Viktor calls it the revaluation minute. Viktor sits. Viktor lists one moment when he acted from borrowed rules. Viktor forgives himself. Viktor lists one moment when he acted from chosen values. Viktor thanks himself. Viktor breathes. Viktor closes the loop. The ritual trains the mind to notice alignment. Alignment beats anxiety over time. Viktor returns to the present and asks the hard question: what is the cost of staying small? Viktor names the obvious: lost chances, quiet bitterness, less joy. Viktor names the less obvious: your energy goes to hiding rather than creating. Nietzsche would say, you throw your strength into keeping the mask instead of building you. Viktor says, that is wasted life. Viktor believes you can use your energy differently. Now Viktor gives a simple weekly plan. 3 practices, small and doable. 1. The 90-second anchor 3 times a day. 2. The 1-sentence boundary, once in a public context. 3. The naming ritual, 3 minutes twice a week. Viktor promises nothing miraculous at midnight. Viktor promises that steady small work stacks into competence. Viktor promises that competence becomes confidence. Viktor closes with a small test of courage. Viktor invites you to script 1 truth this week, a sentence that feels true and slightly dangerous. Viktor will watch you deliver it. Viktor will not judge. Viktor will celebrate. Viktor repeats, you are not the tremor. You are the hand that steadies. You are the mind that watches and names. You are the person who chooses a value and keeps it. Viktor ends this first part with a line he repeats in his head when fear wants to rewrite the script. Viktor stares the abyss. Viktor steps anyway. Viktor laughs when the heart races. Viktor breathes. Viktor acts. Do you want the next step? Viktor will guide you through exposure that does not humiliate, rituals that anchor identity, and ways to build a small community that witnesses your practice. Viktor will teach you how to make Nietzsche's courage live with Jung's honesty and Eastern stillness, so that social fear becomes a teacher, not a jailer. Viktor looks at you, in the third person, and very direct. Viktor says, begin. Viktor says, 90 seconds. Viktor says, name one hidden thing. Viktor says, say one small truth this week. Viktor will meet you there. Viktor does not begin with pep talk. Viktor begins with a sharper question. What is the story that keeps you small? Viktor asks this because the stories are the scaffolding of the anxious self. Viktor watches a mind loop, a phrase, a memory, a forecast. Viktor sees that loop like a groove that a record player keeps tracing. Viktor wants to change the record. Viktor shows how. Viktor believes in 3 layers. Layer 1 is the body. Layer 2 is the story you tell about yourself. Layer 3 is the value system that orders your life. Viktor will work all 3. Viktor will speak plain, then show practice. Viktor will bring Nietzsche, Jung, Stoics, and Eastern calm into one toolbox. Viktor will make it feel like someone trusted in the room teaching you how to breathe, name, and act. Viktor explains the body signal again, but a level deeper. Viktor says, the body treats social threat like danger because, for our ancestors, being expelled from a group meant death. The alarm makes sense. Viktor does not ask you to stop the alarm. Viktor asks you to redirect it. When the heart spikes, Viktor teaches you to do 2 things: slow the system and put the mental spotlight on a higher question. Viktor calls the higher question, what is the value I want to serve right now? Viktor chooses clarity over panic. Viktor gives a steady exercise he calls the 2-beat check. Viktor inhales for 4, exhales for 6, and names the muscle that tightens. Viktor says aloud, throat tight. Viktor notices. Viktor then asks, what matter of truth do I want to stand for here? Viktor repeats, naming the body, naming the value. Viktor trains the listener to convert heat into direction. Viktor promises this. Practice changes the groove. Viktor moves to the second layer, the story. Viktor says the mind is a storyteller and most of our social fear lives in the stories. Viktor lays a simple test. Viktor writes down the sentence that runs before panic. If they see me like this, then... Viktor fills the blank. Viktor reads the sentence in a mirror. Viktor says, watch the drama it creates. Viktor says, now ask, is that actually true? What is the smallest proof that it's true? Viktor wants you to confront the exaggeration. Viktor wants you to see the gap between story and fact. Viktor explains Nietzsche here as a practical move. Nietzsche wanted people to make their own values rather than inherit them like old clothes. Viktor translates, pick a value that will carry you through social risk. Viktor gives 3 rules for choosing values. Keep them small, keep them observable, keep them repeatable. Viktor's values are not heroic slogans. Viktor's values are tiny daily acts. Say one honest thing, stand for one boundary, show up for one small audience. Viktor repeats, keep it small, then scale. Viktor now brings Jung into the room. Jung names the shadow. Viktor says the shadow is the unloved part of you that pulls strings under the stage. Viktor proposes a short practice called the shadow note. Viktor sits for 5 minutes. Viktor writes, without stopping, what do I judge in others that I secretly fear in myself? Viktor writes the first 3 sentences that come, then stops. Viktor reads the lines aloud and says, hello. Viktor notes the heat, the urge to exile the page. Viktor sits with it anyway. Viktor says, This practice drains the secret charge. Viktor says, "What you refuse to own will own you." Viktor stitches Nietzsche and Jung together with an instruction: create a value that includes the shadow. Viktor gives an example. Viktor's value: curiosity about my fear. Viktor practices this in conversation by sharing a small worry with a friend and then watching what happens. Viktor expects jagged edges. Viktor is ready for shame. Viktor finds something else. Often, the shame thins and connection follows. Viktor says, "Sometimes the world mirrors you back, not to punish, but to meet." Viktor adds a stoic frame. Viktor quotes Epictetus in Viktor Speak: "Some things are up to you, many things are not." Viktor uses that to carve a battlefield. Viktor asks, "What is within your control in this social moment?" Viktor lists 3 items: voice, breath, choice to speak or stay silent. Viktor shows how narrowing the focus calms the nervous system. Viktor calls this the control triad. Viktor practices it: breathe, speak a short sentence, accept outcome. Viktor repeats: control the immediate, not the rumor mill of the future. Viktor now meets Eastern practice with the breath and the brief sitting. Viktor teaches the minute of presence. Viktor sits, eyes soft, senses the floor under his feet, notes 5 sounds, feels the breath, then speaks. Viktor emphasizes, the minute is not a trick to make fear vanish. The minute is a clear observation that breaks the story's momentum. Viktor uses this to interrupt catastrophic imagination. Viktor says, presence is like putting sand in the gears of worry. The gears slow. You can act. Viktor turns to action design. Viktor rejects exposure as blind bravery. Viktor designs an exposure ladder that feels safe and clever. Viktor labels steps: glance, question, disclose, perform. Viktor gives examples for each. Glance is making eye contact at the coffee shop for 5 seconds. Question is asking a stranger a small thing. Disclose is telling one short truth to a friend. Perform is speaking a 3-minute bit to a small group. Viktor coaches pacing. Move only 1 rung up per week. Viktor insists on logging reaction. What happened? What felt worse? What actually occurred? Viktor repeats. The brain learns through experience, and you are rewriting expectation. Viktor addresses the favorite resistance. But what if I fail? Viktor answers like this. Failure is the raw material of becoming. Viktor borrows Nietzsche directly, amor fati, love of fate. Viktor reframes failure as data and as story. Viktor teaches a tiny ritual for failure. After discomfort, Viktor writes 3 facts. 1 lesson, 1 next, small step. Viktor closes with a breath and a phrase. Viktor keeps going. Viktor repeats that phrase to cement habit. Viktor now shapes identity. Viktor asks, who are you becoming if you practice these moves? Viktor warns against the trap of becoming another mask. Viktor recommends a periodic audit. Viktor calls it the quarterly revaluation. Viktor sits for 20 minutes. Lists 3 actions that matched values. Lists 3 lies, the old story told, and then writes 1 new public act to test the new value. Viktor uses Nietzsche's language, revalue. Viktor uses Jung's language, integrate. Viktor uses Eastern language, be present. Viktor blends them, revalue with awareness, act with presence, own the shadow. Viktor gives a small group idea. Viktor suggests an accountability trio where each person offers 1 micro-challenge a week and witnesses one another without fixing. Viktor notes the power. Social anxiety collapses when witnessed by allies practicing courage. Viktor says this is not therapy. Viktor says this is training ground. Viktor repeats, practice is public and kind. Viktor introduces the idea of narrative authority. Viktor says, by making values public and small, Viktor reclaims the story of himself. Viktor warns, not everyone will like the new story. Viktor accepts that. Viktor points out a paradox. You gain freedom when you stop trying to be liked by everyone. Viktor calls it the freedom through solidarity paradox. Viktor notes, the person who is busy pleasing everyone pleases no one, including themselves. Viktor closes the core analysis with an integration practice called the 3-minute bridge. Viktor sits, breathes, names the body sensation, names the story in the mind, names the value to be honored. Viktor then acts immediately. A small boundary, a question, or a truth. Viktor recommends this daily. Viktor says, the daily bridge trains you to cross fear into action. Viktor leaves an open loop. Viktor says, next, Viktor will teach how to scale these moves into important arenas: work, love, public speaking, without reverting to old fear. Viktor promises maps for conversations, scripts for boundary setting, and rituals to steady the nervous system before big moments. Viktor asks only one thing now. Do one small act this week that scares you, and then write what actually happened. Viktor will meet you back with the result. Viktor ends this section the way he began, with a direct line. Viktor stares the abyss. Viktor steps anyway. Viktor breathes. Viktor names. Viktor acts. Viktor repeats, you are the author of your next story. Viktor says, write it with the small, steady tools you now have. Viktor will walk with you chapter by chapter, shadow by shadow, value by value. Viktor opens with a challenge. Viktor asks for one honest month, not a miracle, just disciplined practice. Viktor promises concrete changes in how the body responds, how the mind tells stories, and how the life looks on the other side. Viktor will give tools you can do tonight and rituals you keep for years. Viktor makes them small. Viktor makes them repeatable. Viktor makes them real. Viktor begins with the work arena, because Viktor knows most people feel their tremor at work. Viktor teaches the pre-meeting ritual. Viktor breathes in 4, Viktor breathes out 6, Viktor names the tight place, Viktor states one value aloud, Viktor values clarity. Viktor sits for 30 seconds and Viktor loosens the jaw. Viktor walks into the room with that single line in his head. Viktor notices how power shifts when intention replaces panic. Viktor turns to the relationship arena next. Viktor gives the tiny vulnerability move. Viktor thinks of one small truth that will increase connection and not ruin the relationship. Viktor practices the sentence in the mirror until Viktor can say it steady. Viktor chooses a soft voice. Viktor watches shame arrive, and Viktor lets it be. Viktor notices the other person does not collapse. Viktor notices trust grows. Viktor moves to social media, the modern breeding ground of second-hand panic. Viktor prescribes the 2-post rule. Viktor deletes the reflex to post every thought. Viktor drafts 2 posts a week that align with Viktor's chosen values. Viktor posts with a short caption and Viktor resists counting likes for 48 hours. Viktor watches the need for approval thin. Viktor recognizes the small victories when Viktor posts and Viktor still breathes. Viktor now gives a method for public speaking that does not rely on motivation but on systems. Viktor builds the 3-anchor template. Viktor chooses an opening anchor, a 1-sentence truth, Viktor will say if fear spreads. Viktor chooses a mid-anchor, a brief pause and 2 deep breaths to reset. Viktor chooses an end anchor, a small intentional bow or phrase that brings closure. Viktor practices all 3 anchors standing in the kitchen. Viktor performs to a plant. Viktor notes the pulse slow after 3 repetitions. Viktor introduces the exposure ladder again with domain-specific rungs. Viktor recommends starting with micro-level exposure. Viktor makes eye contact with 3 strangers this week. Viktor recommends medium-level exposure. Viktor asks a colleague for feedback. Viktor recommends high-level exposure. Viktor volunteers to give a short presentation. Viktor tracks outcomes in a simple log. Viktor writes what happened. Viktor writes what actually went wrong. Viktor writes what Viktor learned. Viktor repeats, the brain loves predictable data more than fearless hopes. Viktor addresses the relapse plan because Viktor knows old patterns return. Viktor gives the relapse script. Viktor notices the old pattern. Viktor forgives the self. Viktor names the trigger. Viktor does one breath practice. Viktor does one small action aligned with the value. Viktor writes one line to the accountability trio. Viktor returns to practice without shame. Viktor repeats, relapse is not failure, relapse is information. Viktor builds rituals for everyday life, because Viktor knows change is slow and rituals make it durable. Viktor prescribes the morning 1-minute revaluation. Viktor sits. Viktor lists one borrowed rule Viktor will not follow today. Viktor lists one small value Viktor will honor. Viktor imagines one social situation. Viktor will meet with this value. Viktor practices 7 mornings in a row. Viktor notes a subtle shift in choices. Viktor develops community because Viktor believes courage is contagious. Viktor finds 2 people to be an accountability trio. Viktor meets weekly for 15 minutes. Viktor states, 1 micro-challenge. Viktor reports completion. Viktor gives 1 piece of honest, warm feedback. Viktor observes the trio becomes a safe gym for courage. Viktor repeats, public practice in private company rewires fear. Viktor explains the practice of revaluation weeks. Viktor selects 1 life area each month. Viktor chooses work, relationships, public presence, or leisure. Viktor applies the same set of small moves, and Viktor measures the change. Viktor writes a short reflection at month's end. Viktor judges not only external outcomes, Viktor judges internal coherence. Did Viktor act more by chosen values than by panic? Viktor now teaches a precise shadow integration move for when hidden reactions explode in social moments. Viktor uses the pause and name technique. Viktor pauses for 3 full breaths. Viktor names the reactive feeling in 1 word. Viktor states the nearest value with a short sentence. Viktor takes 1 small action that aligns. Viktor records in the night journal the trigger, the naming, and the tiny choice. Viktor finds this reduces projection and makes shame less contagious. Viktor ties in Nietzsche's idea by showing the small step that looks like courage but is actually revaluation. Viktor asks, what value will you use to judge the moment? Viktor says, pick 1 value that makes sense in real life. Viktor chooses honesty, not as a speech but as a daily test. Viktor will say 1 honest sentence every day. Viktor practices this for a month, and Viktor changes his baseline identity from people pleaser to person who speaks truth with care. Viktor mixes Jung with daily practice by suggesting the dream note. Viktor keeps a small notebook by the bed. Viktor writes 1 image from any dream. Viktor asks, what feeling did the image carry? Viktor asks, which social mask did the image show? Viktor connects the dream to 1 waking social pattern. Viktor carries that insight into 1 exposure the next day. Viktor notices how the dream started to explain repeated social mistakes. Viktor values this because unconscious content loses power when it is seen. Viktor adds an equanimity practice drawn from Eastern methods to handle acute embarrassment. Viktor sits for 5 breaths. Viktor imagines the embarrassment as weather passing through a field. Viktor says the phrase, this too is passing. Viktor lets the heat flow without investment. Viktor notices the urge to fix. And Viktor delays the urge for 5 minutes. Viktor watches the urge decline. Viktor finds that staying present dissolves the drama. Viktor designs a professional upward arc that does not demand perfection. Viktor picks a public micro-goal. Viktor commits to a 3-minute talk in a small meetup within 3 months. Viktor breaks the goal into weekly tasks. Viktor writes the opening. Viktor practices the opening. Viktor tests the opening with 1 friend. Viktor rehearses the anchors. Viktor does not skip the tiny steps, because Viktor knows the ladder makes the climb steady. Viktor advises cultivating a personal archive of success. Viktor keeps a folder labeled evidence. Viktor saves small wins. Viktor's thank you message that led to a real invite. Viktor's boundary that held. Viktor's short talk that did not collapse. Viktor opens evidence once a week when self-doubt returns. Viktor reads the folder slowly. Viktor notices doubt loses its power against data. Viktor prepares for the long game by teaching yearly revaluation. Viktor marks a day every 12 months to reevaluate values. Viktor asks, what value still serves? What value has become brittle? Viktor edits the list. Viktor then chooses one audacious value for the next year, like lead with truth or build intimacy. Viktor designs 12 small experiments to test that value. Viktor lives the year like a laboratory. Viktor closes with a ritual for public failure. Viktor sits with a friend. Viktor tells one small failure from the week. Viktor asks for one honest question from the friend. Viktor listens. Viktor thanks. Viktor breathes. Viktor finds that speaking failure in a safe setting bleaches shame. Viktor repeats. Speaking truth dissolves the tyranny of imagined verdicts. Viktor offers a concise decision filter for social moments. Viktor breathes. Viktor asks, does this choice honor my chosen value? Viktor then chooses the smallest next right move. Viktor uses this filter in meetings, dates, and messages. Viktor notices decisions become easier. Viktor finds anxiety reduces when choices follow a map. Viktor ends with a synthesis. Viktor says, steady the body, name the shadow, choose small values, practice public tiny acts, build community, revalue regularly. Viktor reminds that Nietzsche's call to become your own author does not mean doing grand heroics in one night. Viktor reminds that Jung's shadow work is not theatrical confession, but quiet naming and integration. Viktor reminds that Eastern equanimity is not cold detachment, but present compassion that lets fear pass. Viktor issues a last challenge. Viktor asks for 7 days of courageous micro-practice. Viktor lists the week. Viktor does the 90-second anchor 3 times a day. Viktor shares one short truth with a person. Viktor practices one micro-exposure. Viktor notes one dream image. Viktor reads the evidence folder twice. Viktor reports back to the trio. Viktor promises accountability with kindness. Viktor finishes with a clear image. Viktor stands at the edge of an abyss. Viktor turns music on. Viktor dances one step. Viktor breathes. Viktor laughs. Viktor steps back and keeps walking. Viktor invites you to keep that dance. Viktor ends by saying, Viktor does not remove fear. Viktor transforms it into a training force. Viktor says, you are not the tremor. Viktor is the hand that steadies. Viktor is the life that keeps making small, brave moves.